Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshunamilitan Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Yam Pravajantam Anupeta Apeta Krityam Rapayano Viraha Katara Ajuhava Putreti Tanmayataya Taravo Binedus Tam Sarvabhutam Hridaya Murimanatusmi Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatam Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraya Abhaktya Vihina Parada Lakshay Kiptascha Kamari Tarangamadye Kripa Maitam Sharanam Prapanna Vrinde Namaste Charanara Vindam Tave Vasmi Najivami Tvaya Vina Iti Vigyaya Radhe Tvam Nayanam Charanandike Vancha Kalpatarubhascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha. So we begin by offering our most humble obeisance unto the lotus feet of our beloved Gurus, unto Sri Guru Pada Padma Nityalita Bhavishta Om Vishnu Pada Sto Tarsat Sri Srimad Abhaya Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada and Sri Guru Pada Padma Nityalita Bhavishta Om Vishnu Pada Sto Tarsat Sri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj, under our exalted Rupa Nuga Guru Varga and all the assembled Vaishnavas, Vaishnavis. So today it's the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Prabhupada. He disappeared from worldly vision on January 1st, 1937. And generally we observe this late December, right? Even early January, but we're on a moon calendar, right? So every 3 years it goes back, and now it's, early December. Next year will be Purushottam Mas, and an extra month is added to bring everything back into, like in the West they have the leap year thing, right? They have an extra month anyway, and leap year. Anyway, so because it is the disappearance day of this most exalted Acharya, and there's so much to say, we'll start by reading the different pranam mantras that were given to him. First, of course, is Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Iti Namane. I offer pranams to Om Vishnupad Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, who in this world is most dear to Krishna. Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Dayitaya Kripadaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Dayane Prabhave Namaha. His name, initiated name, was actually Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Dayita. Varshabhanavi Devi is Srimati Radhika. Dayita means the servant of. So I offer pranams to Shri Varshabhanavi Dayita Das, the manifestation of an ocean of mercy who bestows realization of our eternal relationship with Sri Krishna. Actually, maybe tomorrow, I don't think one day is enough to talk about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. And one way to analyze and talk about the glories of a great personality is to discuss the pranam mantras, which have so much insight into their nature, their mission, their identity, their moods of service. All of that is there. And so, Madhurya Dvala Prema Dya Sri Rupanuga Bhakti Da Sri Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute. O Srila Saraswati Thakur, you deliver Sri Rupanuga Bhakti which is enriched with Ujjvala Madhurya Prem. You are the embodiment of the mercy potency of Sri Gauranga. I offer pranam to you. Who is the mercy potency of Sri Gauranga? Gadadhar Pandit, Srimati Radhika herself, right? And there's something to be said about that when we discuss his birth, how this came about. Namaste Gauravani Sri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Virudha Siddhanta Dvanta Harine. I offer obeisance to you, the embodiment of Sri Gauranga's message. You deliver the fallen and remove the darkness of philosophical misconceptions that are opposed to the precepts taught by Srila Rupa Goswami. Okay. So, beautiful, beautiful prayers. So there are so many sources to take when we are going to discuss Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Prabhupada. His writings are so extensive. His disciples, direct disciples, so powerful, so extraordinary personalities that he drew to him. For the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is like a flower, right? A flower begins like a bud, and gradually it opens more and more and more, right? And this mission was, of course, predicted by Sri Nityananda Prabhu. There's a beautiful section in the Navadita Mahatmya where he's talking to Jiva Goswami, and who's not Goswami yet, but, well, he is, but he doesn't have that title. And they're doing Navadvip Parikram, and when they are on Antardvip, near Mayapur, they're discussing the unfolding of the mission of Mahaprabhu, and how at one time, very soon in the future, just a few hundred years, there will be a great manifestation of Mahaprabhu's mercy, wherein it will be delivered all over the world, and people from all over the world, from west and east, will be coming to Mayapur to celebrate and glorify Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur laid the foundation for that. The modern foundation. The foundation, of course, was Mahaprabhu's own preaching, and then the writings of his followers, the Goswamis, and then the subsequent writings of those who followed them, Narottam, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Baladev Vidyabhushan, right? And then his mission was kept in the hearts of the very special Babajis in Navadvip and in Vrindavan. But then Bhaktivinoda Thakur came, the seventh Goswami, right? Saptam Goswami, very intimate associate of Mahaprabhu, of Srimati Radhika, Kamala Manjari, who did the amazing work of revealing to the modern world the birthplace of Mahaprabhu and beginning the purification of the Gaudiya Vaishnava line, because after Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Baladev Vidyabhushan, because of the time element, the Gaudiya Vaishnavism was afflicted with by impurities of impure followers, right, who represented themselves as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, but actually were very far off. They were actually Apa Sampradaya, preaching Siddhanta, right? And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur came to write, to reveal the writings of the Goswamis, and to establish very authoritatively in his writings Chaitanya Shikshamrita, Jaiva Dharma, his commentaries on Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya Shikshamrita, Chaitanya Bhagavat. I don't know if he did a Chaitanya Bhagavat. But anyway, so many writings to establish the pure line and distinguish it from these Sahaja versions of Vaishnavism. But then he realized that I have conceptualized the movement of Mahaprabhu, right? I've conceptualized it, and envision how it will unfold, but we need a very great, extraordinary personality to put it into form, right? To manifest it as a preaching mission. And so he prayed extensively to the Lord, to Mahaprabhu. And when he was in Jagannath Puri as the magistrate, he was writing, he was doing so much. He himself did preaching in as much as he could, establishing the principle of Namahat, preaching wherever you are to households and creating little centers of Vaishnava culture that could gradually build and build until there were sufficient numbers to actually make a temple or a mat. This was his Namhata, which in the modern format is Krishna conscious cell preaching. In ISKCON, they call it Kalpavriksha. Very extraordinary, very effective, actually. That was the model of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. But he himself was so busy with so many things that he wanted somebody who would be dedicated to creating that mission itself. So he prayed and prayed and prayed. He said, for a ray of Vishnu. And while he was in Puri, he was praying like that, and his wife, Bhagavati Dasi, Devi Dasi, gave birth to an extraordinary son. All the symptoms of a Mahapurush were manifest in this little baby child. He had natural markings on his body of kantimala, right, neck beads, tilak, and his umbilical cord was wrapped around him like a Brahmin thread, right? And our Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, said, he would say very proudly, yes, my Guru Maharaj, Brahmin by birth. You know, he was already Brahminical. And the astrologers who did his chart said, oh yes, this is definitely a great Mahapurush who will be responsible for establishing Mahaprabhu's movement and setting it all over the world. And that was in 1876. And because he had prayed constantly, and when he was in Puri to Lord Jagannath, Bimala Devi represents all the wives of Krishna, as Jagannath is like Krishna and Dwarka, but also she is an expansion of Srimati Radhika. And so, because he prayed there, he named his son Bimala Prasad. Bimala Prasad. And he had prayed for a ray of Vishnu. Actually, there's a very lovely book compiled by Bhakti Bodhayan Goswami Maharaj, the successor to Bhakti Pramod Puri Goswami. And he wrote this beautiful book about Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Prabhupada, which describes his mission, describes some history, and very nicely describes one sometimes overlooked contribution of Saraswati Prabhupada, which were his disciples and prominent persons who followed in his line. And so there's a whole section, a brief biography of all these incredible personalities, which is a very nice way to glorify Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. Anyway, he said something beautiful, because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada's internal identity revealed to his disciples, confidential disciples, Nayana Manjari, right? Which means like the eyes or the beauty of the eyes of Srimati Radhika. And he described him as a ray of the glance of Srimati Radhika coming to this world. Radhika herself, Srimati Radhika, is the complete manifestation of Karuna Shakti, of compassion and mercy. And it is her compassion and mercy which, combined with Krishna, becomes Mahaprabhu, and which spreads that compassion, takes, Krishna then, covered by the compassion of Srimati Radhika, spreads this love of God throughout the entire universe, right? And it's that special quality of compassion that he embodies. I mean, that's very powerful. The beauty of the eyes of Srimati Radhika, that ray, that empowerment of her love for all living entities, and her desire for what? To increase the service to her prananath, to Sri Krishna, by bringing so many more servants back to the spiritual world. And especially, and we know that Mahaprabhu's desire was to give to those who were qualified and who had a special hankering to become personal maidservants of Srimati Radhika. Right? And we know that Krishna said to the gopis that, oh, naparayaham niravadya samyujam, I can never repay you for the service that you have offered me. So selfless, so wonderful. So Mahaprabhu is Krishna, and by his spreading with the empowerment of Srimati Radhika, this mercy, this love of God, and especially the opportunity to become servants of Srimati Radhika. In that sense, he's trying to repay Radhika by bringing so many Manjari servants to her to assist her in her service to him. Right? Because this unnata ujvala rasam svabhakti striyam, it can refer broadly to the special mood of the Brajbasis, that special kind of prem. It can refer more specifically to the Madhurya Ras, unnata ujvala rasam, the brilliantly shining quality of Madhurya Ras, but svabhakti striyam means that service to Srimati Radhika herself. So Krishna is offering to Srimati Radhika, oh, in this mission we're going to bring so many of your beloveds back to you to assist you in your most desired service, manjaris, right? So, So Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Prabhupada is one of those prominent manjaris, a ray, the very embodiment of the merciful glance of Srimati Radhika. And so that beautiful conception, this idea of the ray, I've heard the idea of ray of Vishnu, but the ray of the glance of Srimati Radhika. It's a very beautiful book, and there's another book compiled from lectures of Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayana Goswami Maharaj, which gives so much of the history of Saraswati Prabhupada's preaching while he was in India. How active he was, going from one place to another, sending his disciples everywhere, following them and assisting them in their preaching as well. So many beautiful stories. If we were to go through both these books, it would take us at least a month. So this kind of day is filled with the mercy of these great persons. On this day we can pray to them, that which they have come to give, that which they have come to establish in the hearts of all the living entities, please establish it in our heart. And we have been connected with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada by those who follow him, right? My Guru Maharaj, direct disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. My sannyas guru, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayana Goswami Maharaj, prominent disciple of Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, direct disciple. And our Shiksha gurus, like Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj, Bhakti Pramod Puri Goswami Maharaj, Bhakti Dayata Madhav Maharaj, Bhakti Vigyan Bharati Maharaj, all these personalities writing and explaining and spreading the special revelations given to the world by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. His contribution, actually, we rely on the books of Bhaktivinoda Thakur so much for our deeper understanding of the Goswami's writings, right? But no one would know of Bhaktivinoda Thakur if it weren't for his chief disciple, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. Were it not for his vigorous preaching and printing the books of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who would know of Bhaktivinoda Thakur? Some scholars, perhaps, some dry scholars studying the various branches of Vaishnavism, they exist today, but they have no real deep connection with any of the teachings and revelations of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. when you read their books or go into discussions with them, it's all academic. It's all bees and wasps trying to drink the honey by licking the jar, right? They see it, but they can't understand what it is just by looking at it in a jar. Could you ever understand what honey is by looking at it in a jar? No. Even if somebody described it to you, you could never understand it. And honey has so many different kinds of tastes, too. This kind of honey, that kind of honey, coming from this flower, coming from that flower, right? So many subtleties, you never understand it, right? Unless you can taste it directly. And so our line is full of very special bees who are tasting this honey, this unnata ujvala rasa swabhakti shriyam. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur revealed it. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Prabhupada revealed Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and then empowered and brought to him so many extraordinary personalities to put the desire of Bhaktivinoda Thakur into form. So when Saraswati Prabhupada was born in Puri, all these signs were given in his astrological chart. And when he was just 6 months old, it was time for him to take grains. That was the grain ceremony, right? And at that time, just at that same time, the Rath Yatra festival was being held. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur's house was just up the road from the Jagannath temple. And so the cart goes right by there every time. But that day, even though the cart had just begun its journey, couldn't have been gone very far, maybe half an hour at most, right? All of a sudden it stopped. It stopped. And the king and all the, mahants and priests and pujaris and pundits and everybody were trying to get it to go. And they would employ many means. Aside from all the hundreds of thousands of people pulling the ropes, they could get horses, elephants, whatever they could. They're trying to get that cart to go. It would not budge. For 2 days, it stood right in front of the house of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And of course, wherever the cart is, tumultuous kirtan, right? And so, Lord Jagannath was there, and he wanted darshan of his great servant, the one who was going to come and spread the mercy and the teachings of Mahaprabhu. Lord Jagannath is Mahaprabhu who appears in a wooden form, right? And he wanted to see that special personality, who was, at this point was in the form of a baby. So he stayed there, he wouldn't budge. So finally, the mother of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada thought, oh, this is an opportunity. He is supposed to take the grains, and she took him to the cart of Lord Jagannath and took the grains, the direct prasad of Lord Jagannath. And that was his first grains, the sweet rice, the kheer. And as the child was there, all of a sudden, one of the giant garlands that was on Lord Jagannath fell down at the feet of Lord Jagannath and before the little baby who was right there. And the pujari, this is very unusual, these garlands are made very strong. They don't want them breaking off all the time, they never do. But it immediately dropped, and the pujari, astonished, put it on the baby. And it was like a special blessing. People with no faith and no understanding, they think, oh, just sentiment. No, very special things. And so the child grew up. He was very grave, very mature for his age. And there are many stories about him. In the broader Vaishnava communities, these stories are told. I've told a couple of the stories, and Gurudev objected to them. He said, I've not heard this from my Guru Maharaj. But they're well known. Our Prabhupada told the same stories. But he was making the point. His Guru didn't necessarily share certain stories because in his own heart, maybe this compromised in the vision of some people the magnificence of my Guru. So there's one story which actually from another vision glorifies him greatly. And that's when he was just a small boy. He went into the pantry and took a mango. Because mangoes in India, very extraordinary, very sweet. And he ate it. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur came to him and said, "Oh, my son, why have you eaten this mango? We never eat anything that's not offered directly to the Lord. If we eat it before it's offered, that's a bad thing. That's like a sin. It's like an offense." And this little boy was very affected by that instruction. And he felt, "Oh, I've become an offender." And the story is, from that point on, he never took a mango again in his whole life. Even when he was older, even when he was guru. And mango season is so delicious. And I mean, everybody wants mangoes. You have to be careful. If you eat too many mangoes, you'll burst out in boils and everything. And that happens to a lot of people. But he would not take mango, saying, "Oh, I'm a great offender." Even though for a child that age, there's no offense. But he wasn't a child that age. He was an eternally liberated personality, acting like a child. So what was that? It was showing a very powerful lesson of, even at that young age, how grave and how serious he was about bhakti. And so he would voluntarily give that delightful mango prasadam up to teach this powerful lesson that we should only take Krishna prasad, right? And if you live in a mat or a temple, only take those things offered to the deity, right? Or in your household, everything should be offered to Krishna. So he was very intelligent. He was what you call a shrutidar. Whatever he would hear or read one time, no matter what subject, not just scripture, but any subject, he would memorize it completely, fully. And so at a young age, his scholarship, his development of all studies was very advanced. And he would hear from his father, and by the time he was 9 years old, he had already committed to memory all of the Bhagavad Gita and understanding that. And he was hearing from his father so many subject matters. His father was teaching him Chaitanya Shikshamrita, right, which he had been writing at that time. Being born in 1876, when was Chaitanya Shikshamrita written? Was it in the 1880s? Jaiva Dharma followed. It was published, printed in the 1880s. So but he was writing it all along before that. And by the time he was 12, he was helping to edit the writings for these books and for the monthly magazine Sajjana Toshini that Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote. It was a magazine every month that had very deep philosophical writings from Bhaktivinoda Thakur and from acharyas. And then later it became the Harmonist magazine, which Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Prabhupada continued. The Sajjana Toshini became the Harmonist. And I think at that time he put it in English. I'm not sure. No, it wasn't in English yet. It became in English when Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj began the magazine The Rays of the Harmonist, where he would take articles written in Bengali in the Harmonist and translate them into English. And that was done during the manifest pastimes of Srila Narayan Maharaj up until his disappearance, demanding. They did only 2 issues a year, but they were very deep and beautiful, beautiful magazine. In fact, that is also a great source of understanding Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, because every one of those magazines has an article by him. And you can understand his manubhishta in those articles on so many subject matters. The magnificent articles. And I remember one time, just to give you a sense of how important that was to our Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, because he wanted to continue and reveal to the world those very special teachings that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada took and presented. He didn't want that to be lost. And he also included in it writings of the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, some of which were in that magazine, some which were in other things. So So he did that. And when we were in Bangalore, we had a great desire to distribute the Rays of the Harmonist. But it was a very slick magazine. It was printed on, on glossy paper and in small numbers. And in India at that time, in the early 2000s, it was like, it cost us 80 rupees just to buy it, right? That was practically the printing cost. And so to distribute it, we had to distribute it for like 100 rupees. I think maybe we paid 100 rupees, which at that time was a lot of money. People weren't buying magazines on the street for 100 rupees. Inflation took over in India, so now you say 100 rupees, so what? They buy a cup of chai for 100 rupees, or a snack. But back then, 100 rupees was a day's pay, right? They're not just going to buy that for a magazine. So we had a hard time. So we printed a very small little magazine. We called the Gaudiya Courier, we called it. And we put in it articles from the Rays of the Harmonist. Right? And it was on cheap paper. Little glossy, it was only this big, little tiny books. And we'd have 3 or 4 articles. And so we showed it to devotees. All the devotees loved it. It was really nice little, I have a copy of it still. Survived. We would print 10,000, and those only cost us 6 or 7 rupees to print, because we print 10,000 at a time. And we could sell them for 10. And that was okay. People give you 10 rupees. And I proudly showed it to Gurudev one time in Navadvip. And up until that time, all the devotees, even, senior devotees, they all loved it. And I showed it to Gurudev, and he asked a few questions. Oh, well, this, that, and then he said, what about my harmonist? I told him how many we were distributing, and he said, what about my harmonist? And I said, well, it was so expensive, we couldn't distribute it, So we made this, which was the rays of your harmonist. And he said, he looked at me and he goes, And he just flipped it back to me, a little bit, and flipped it, landed in my lap. He wasn't saying that it was bad. He just didn't want our energies to be distracted from the Rays of the Harmonist, which was such a great, grand magazine. So we didn't print any more of them. We'd done 2 issues, and we redoubled our efforts to try to sell the Harmonists, right? But at any rate, why was he attached to that? Because that is what Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Prabhupada had printed. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Prabhupada was so intent on spreading this message in all ways possible. He not only recreated all the books of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and other books like Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srimad Bhagavatam, etc., but he had a daily magazine, a weekly magazine, a monthly magazine, right? I think a bi-weekly magazine too. He wanted them all handed out. And his disciples would go out on the streets. Bhaktivedanta Keshavraj would do that as well. They would go out with a little box and these little leaflets and all. And somebody one time asked him, how could you possibly print a magazine every day? What will you say every single day? And he responded that, well, in this world, in this city alone, in Calcutta, there are 3 major newspapers. So big. And every day they print the news of this city and of India and of the world. Right? And what is this world? What is this universe? It's an insignificant part of the creation of the Lord. Right? And so if in this one tiny city, in this one tiny universe, we can print a magazine 3 times a day, why can't we print a leaflet every day about the glories of the Lord? There's unlimited subject matter. And he had different disciples in charge of this. This was one of his Manobhishtas. Before Bhaktivinoda Thakur had left this world, he had instructed him that this publishing of the books of our Goswamis was very important, and that they should be informed about the glories of Sridham Mayapur. Right? Preach the glories of Sridham Mayapur by this book distribution. Right? And so he took it very seriously. He established printing presses, right, to do this. And that was a major part of his mission. Our Guru Maharaj, our Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami, our Srila Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Abhaya Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami, Prabhupada, in one of the last times that he had spoken with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Prabhupada, I think this is perhaps 1936, yes, 1936. I guess it was in August. Spoke with him and said, "What can I do for you?" And he said, "If you have any money, print books." He said, "I've established so many mats and even very elaborate temples. But I see that in the temples, sometimes the men are fighting over whose room, who gets this room, who gets that room, what facility, which goes on to the present day, right?" He said, "I think it would be better, sometimes I think I should never have built that mat. Maybe I should tear down the temple and sell the marble and sell the bricks and use the money to print books." This was a mood, right? Not that he wanted to do it, because he established the mats. The mats are places for people to come and to be taught, right? So he set that model up. His preaching began in a very simple way. They had reestablished the birthplace of Mahaprabhu and established a small temple there. And for many years, he stayed there and was doing a very powerful vrat to chant 1 billion names of the Lord and not less than 3 lakhs a day to prepare himself for this mission that he was going to take up on the order of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He had been groomed from birth for this, right? And so he was doing this year after year, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur disappeared in 1914. And he was then thinking, and the last message that he had sent him, a letter, and his mother had sent him a similar letter, "You must establish a mission, a preaching mission that will go worldwide to preach this mission." Now, India at that time was under the control of the British Raj, and of course, there were wealthy people, wealthy merchants, wealthy persons, but to establish a religious movement, it just was unheard of, and actually wasn't really in the tradition of Indian religions. It wasn't necessarily evangelical like in the West. Christian missions, there are many that are evangelical. Teachers, great personalities might live somewhere, and many people would come to them. But aside from, Ramanuja had some temples that he established, mats, I think, 6 of them? I forget. And those were his centers in different parts of India. And Shankaracharya had a similar kind of thing. But the idea of going around everywhere and preaching to common people, that was not really taken up. It was what Nityananda Prabhu had done and Mahaprabhu had done, but they taught the general chanting and glorification of the Lord through Sankirtan. Even they did not establish temples and missions and mats. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada had that conception. And so he was thinking, how am I going to do that? And he was very distressed, right? And this is another story that is carried in the histories given by the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, that feeling this anxiety, how am I going to do this? One day he had a vision. You could call it a sporti, you could call it a svapana darshan, a dream, or you could call it sakshat darshan, where Bhaktivinoda Thakur personally came to him, along with Rupa, Sanatan, all these Goswamis, principal personalities in our line. And they all came to him. And they said, now is the time to begin your mission. And he said, but how will I do it? I have no followers. I have no money. I am completely destitute, sitting here in Mayapur. It was like, like in the role of the Goswamis in Vrindavan. They had nothing. Of course, they individually did make some temples by the influence and mercy of the Lord. Different merchants and kings had come forth to do this. But all over India, worldwide, nothing like that had ever happened. And then he was told, don't worry, rest assured. We are sending you highly, highly qualified people. Right? They're going to come to you very soon. And that happened. Very quickly after that, very super intelligent, educated, topmost personalities in India, young men, began to come and hear from him and become his disciples. And when you look at the qualification of some of these disciples, you have to understand in India at that time, advanced education was very restricted. It was only available to the cream of the cream, right? You could get a lesser education, like what we would consider junior high school or even high school, somewhat. But even that was a little hard to get. But to go to university or college, you had to be very qualified and, had to have some money too. And so only these very aristocratic, highly intelligent and educated young Brahminical persons, right? And this is who he began to attract. And in this book, this mission book, he gives a very nice description of many of them and what their qualifications were, persons like Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, who was educated as a lawyer. And each of them, I won't go through all of them, there are many of them, and how high class they were. Great pundits. Was it my own namesake, Bhakti Gaurav Vaikanas Goswami Maharaj? He was in the family of the court pundits of a king in Bengal. And he himself, from a young age, was so qualified that he defeated all the other pundits. He became the Raj Pandit in the court of the king. And when you read about his pastimes and qualifications, you become astonished. And all these kind of people came to him. And yet, even though they came from such high-class background, they became humble servants, humble brahmacharis, and then in many cases very quickly became sannyasis. But the quality of their service, their dedication, their renunciation, and the degree of their knowledge, astonishing. And that's a very important part of understanding the mission of Saraswati Prabhupada. His angas, right? Or his limbs. He is angi, the source of them. We call it, we're like the Sarasvati Dara. We come from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but all of the modern preachers in our line are from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. And it's very worthwhile to study. You may be in this sangha or that sangha, this group or that group, but to study the teachings and accomplishments and speciality of each of these personalities and how each of them reflected great devotion and aspects of the specialities of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada's teachings. So then in 1918, he took sannyas. He actually gave himself sannyas. Because he didn't, his own Guru Maharaj, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, had passed in 1915. And there's a whole story about that. Bhaktivinoda Thakur had left in 1914. So many stories about his early youth and his mission we haven't even touched on. We just got to the point where he's taken sannyas, and now all these people are going to come to him. And now we have to end. So we're going to have to speak about him again tomorrow and maybe the next day. I remember when I stayed one winter in Rup Sanatan Gaudiya Math, Rasananda Prabhu, who's now Bhaktisiddhanta um, Sridhar Maharaj, on these kind of days, he'd spend 3 or 4 days, speaking. And even that's not enough. So we definitely have to have another talk about, we just kind of barely grazed or touched the glories of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada and his relationship with my Guru Maharaj and all of the specialities, all of his pastimes, we have to do again. So this is just very beginning. We're going to do a regular Guru Puja, and then we're going to do an artik to him. We don't have facility for a very beautiful ceremony like we should have, but one day, in a few years, we will. And this day and his appearance day we'll honor much more grandly, but today in a very simple way. And then in the afternoon, we will have a little program, have another lecture, and they'll have an artik, and then nice prasad in his honor. So on this day, we offer special obeisance and prayers to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, whom we beg for his mercy, for his strength, for his kindness. Our Srila Prabhupada used to say that the grandfather is very merciful. The grandfather is very kind. The father may have to punish, right? But the grandfather, he'll just show mercy. So we can pray to him in a special way, and he'll certainly show us mercy and give us facility to fulfill the orders of his subsequent followers. Okay, so all glories to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada on this Tirubhav Titi, the day of his disappearance. All glories to the followers of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, and may we follow in their footsteps humbly and enthusiastically. Jai. Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol.